네, 안녕하세요.
Nice to meet
인사는
you,
한국어로
everyone. I will greet
어,
myself in Korean,
강연은
but
영어로
do the
하겠습니다.
presentation
So,
in English.
I am pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I work at KAIST, which is just 1 hour away from here. We're a science and technology university, and I do research on the topic of natural language processing, which is the large topic behind this ChatGPT craze. Before I begin my talk, I want to emphasize that this concept of digital heritage is something very new to me, and I think a lot of the NLP researchers. But there has been a lot of recent interest in this topic, looking at historical documents, including something like the Joseon Dynasty, the Annals of Joseon Dynasty. Technically, it presents a very difficult problem because the language, as we know, is very different from the modern day language. So even though the annals are written in the Chinese characters, Hanja, it's not Chinese, right? Modern day Chinese people do not understand it. It's not Korean, obviously. It's just a different language. And it's an archaic language, meaning there isn't much data. And that presents to us AI researchers the biggest challenge. Currently, we can't do AI without data. So with that, let me begin. And this is joint work with faculty and student researchers from New York University, as well as Seonggyungwan University. So the research problem is that the Annals of Joseon Dynasty, and I realized in the booklet that you have, the printout is sort of in a different order. So you may get confused if you look at the book, just look at my slides. So many of you know this much better than me. I actually did not grow up in Korea, so I don't know Korean history very well. And the 500 years of Joseon Dynasty, the records are in this large set of books called Joseon Wangjo-실록, right? And this was originally written in an archaic Korean language, Korean writing system, Hanja, which is actually different from the spoken version that the people in those days spoke, right? And this entire set, the entire annals, were translated into modern-day Korean between the years of 1968 and 1993. And as you can see, it took 25 years, and it is already sort of old, such that, I mean, if you know Korean, you will see an example on the slide of this translation, which is difficult for modern-day Koreans to understand. So it's not really written in contemporary Korean. So if you're not a historian, like I am not a historian, when I read the Korean translation, I don't understand what it's saying. I need more further explanation. So more contemporary translations are needed, and so the 고전 번역원, the Korean national sort of this Institute for Classics Translation, they started retranslating, right? They began in 2012, and they went through and translated one of the kings because it takes so long. And they are projecting the entire new translation to take another 20 years. So we said, well, we have machine translation, which is not going to give us a perfect solution, but it is something that we can do very quickly, and we can try machine translation to see what actually happens. Okay, so we made this model, and you know the mechanism for how the model works, I'm not going to go into details. It's basically we're going to take the Korean input, the archaic Korean input, And once you have some parallel data that says this is the original archaic Korean sentence and this is the modern translation that we want, right? So that is one pair of sentences as part of our parallel corpus, okay? But the parallel corpus we have so far is very small because it has been translated into modern Korean for just one of the 28 kings, right? Or 27 or 20-some kings, right? So then, is it going to work well? That was our research question. We wanted to see if it will work. But then, so we have a bunch of other data. So we have the actual entire Joseon Dynasty, which we have the original Hanja version, and then we have the old translated version, Korean, that was done in 1960s and 70s, right? So that's what we call OKO. And then the contemporary Korean is done only for the 22nd king, King Jeongjo, right? And then for Sejong, the great King Sejong, we have the English translation. For some reason, they translated, probably because he's considered the most popular king, the best king, they translated it into English. So this is the number of sentences we have in each of these data sets. And this is what we work with, right? So most of it is the old version of Korean translation. And then we have a little bit of the modern Korean and we have some English. So if we combine all of these and use those as our training sentences, are we going to be able to succeed in our translation task? So the method, I mean, the only thing that kind of makes sense maybe is that it's done by the transformer model. And the transformer model is the T in the ChatGPT. Okay, so you don't have to know exactly what it means, but it's basically the modern way we do language processing is a very, very statistical model. So it's sort of like if you have a sentence like, I want to go blank today, what is the most appropriate word to fill in that blank, right? You know, I could say home or outside or to the park, because the weather's nice, so to the beach. You know, all of these are good words to fill in that blank. And the way we do language nowadays, language modeling, is to make the neural network, the deep learning model, try to predict what is the most appropriate word to go in that blank. And adversely, what should not go in that blank. So if you say a word like desk, right, that is not an appropriate word for that blank. So that's sort of how it works, okay? And the translation is the same thing, right? If you say history in English, in Korean, it's 역사, right? So that's the parallel data that we have. And if you're given as input history, the word history, you're supposed to, the neural network, the deep learning model is supposed to produce 역사, the Korean translation. So training means that when you have this parallel corpus, getting as input some sentence and then producing automatically by your neural network model the translated sentence that is the correct translation. But anyway, so that's how it works. And when we have this 3 data sets, the old Korean, the contemporary Korean, and the English data, and then so these were translated from the original source data, which is the Hanja data, and then the transformer model is supposed to learn that connection between the source language and the target language that we're trying to translate into, right? So that's the target. So when we train the model and actually run the translator, this is the result. And the number actually does not mean so much because the number itself, only how much it improved is the thing that you can decipher from this slide. So there was previous research that looked at translating Hanja into Old Korean, and the score that they got is 41.56. And A very good translation system will get something like 60 for something like English to Spanish translation. 60 or 70, or, I mean, the higher the better, right? It does not mean 60 out of 100. It's kind of weird, the scoring system. But anyway, 41 means that, it's sort of intermediate, it kind of works. And then when we apply our model, it improves about 10% to 46. And then when we try with a larger data set, combining the three different data sets that we have, we get like the best model you can possibly get for translating into Old Korean for now. If you take something like Papago, which is the commercial, or like you can use freely on the web. It's powered by Naver. So Papago is something that our students and ourselves, everybody in Korea, seems to use these days for translation from Korean into English, from English to Korean, and Korean into many other languages. If you try Papago on Joseon Wangjosilok, the Annals of Joseon Dynasty, into contemporary Korean, the score it gets is in the range of 11, which is very low, right, compared to the research systems. It means that whatever is coming out of the Papago system is not understandable at all by anyone who speaks Korean, right? If we apply our model with just Hanja into Hanja or Old Korean into contemporary Korean, which is just one of the kings, just only King Jeongjo, it still does not perform very well. If you have it if you do it with larger data set, including the old translation, then you get 46, which is pretty good. And then if you use all three, then it improves a little bit more. Okay, so we're now going to, I'm going to jump to the English translation. And you can see here, if you try our model to translate the Annals of Joseon Dynasty into English, you get something in the range of 25, which you can see is not as good as the Korean translation. If you actually see the English translated sentences, I should have brought some, they're mostly, you can pick up the words and kind of tell what the sentence is about. This sentence talks about some farming results this year or something like that, poor farming result. But the sentence itself probably doesn't make sense. That's the level of English translation. Let me skip ahead to this. Okay, so this will make more sense, I hope. So the way the Institute for the Translation of Korean Classics, 고전 번역원, so they hire somebody to do the translations, and then they verify or they validate the quality of translation by having another person score and say, here are some errors that they made, so deduct 2 points, 5 points, whatever. And then that result, I have the laser printer, okay, sorry. Okay, that result is this, is this column on the very right. So that's the human translation, and the negative, the size of the bar negative means the amount of deduction for the errors. That's the GT means ground truth meaning the human translation. And then in the middle is our model, called H2KE. And you can see at the word level, phrase level, and sentence level, there is higher or more error, more points deducted for errors in the translation. But compared to the ground truth of the Old Korean, right? The human translation that was done in the 70s and 80s, our model actually has fewer errors than the Old Korean translations. So you can see, they spent 25 years to do the human translation, and then they're spending even more time to do even more human translation, but our model does somewhere in the middle of those two time-delayed translations. And then we also asked non-experts to compare the output of our model against the old Korean translation and also against the contemporary, the newer translation, to see if they can understand whatever the sentence says, right? The translated sentence says. So, for example, these sentences A and B are two different translations, one from our model and one from either the old human translation or the contemporary, the newer translation. And then we ask them, please pick a sentence that makes more sense to you. And so we asked a bunch of just college students to do this who are not historians. And our translations were more readable than the old translations. So you can see ours is better than the old translation in the third set of bars. Okay, for the Cheongjo Annals, and then at the bottom is for all of the kings. And it's higher for Cheongjo because we do have a little bit we do use some of the Cheongjo translations as part of our training data. And you can see the contemporary, right, the top two are the new translations. And of course, the new translations are easier to understand than the automatic translation that we provide. So I think at the top two validates the methodology that we used by asking these college students. And then the bottom two validates that our model does better than the old translations in terms of producing sentences that are easily understandable. Here are some examples. So 한자, that's the original. And then the old translation says 서리가 내렸다, 경연에 나아갔다. And 경연 in contemporary Korean, 경연 means some kind of competition. But what it actually is a royal lecture, and as you can see in the ground truth English data, and our English translation does actually translate it correctly into a royal lecture. Whereas if you feed it to Papago, it'll say contest, which is not the correct translation. So the conclusion here is that we have built this deep learning-based machine translation system, and if you work on the model by selecting the right amount and right combination of training data, you can actually build machine translation systems that work pretty well. So when we went back and talked to the 고전 번역원, the Classics Translation Institute, they were actually really excited about these results and said that they can actually take the output of the machine translation, and then human translators can start with that as a draft rather than working from scratch, which is going to hopefully cut down a lot on the time that they need. And so we are doing actually further research because of ChatGPT, which means better technology that can be used in machine translation. We're predicting that our output will be even better, a little bit better than what we presented here, which is work done about 2 years ago. So we're hoping to actually produce improved machine translation results, and that will help the human translators. And by the way, developing a translation system like this, it took us about 6 months to do it, and the translations themselves come out in, I don't know, like a few days, right, for the entire Annals of Joseon Dynasty. So that's remarkable, I think. And for the second part of the talk, I want to just briefly mention to you some other things that we're doing with the Joseon Dynasty. So what we're trying to do is understand language, right? And Joseon Dynasty we treat it just like any other text that we try to understand, like the New York Times, right? So we try to understand the New York Times so that when somebody asks some questions about some article about Joe Biden doing something, the AI system can automatically answer that question, right? With the Joseon Dynasty, we're trying to do something similar, but it's ancient, archaic language, so technically it's just a much more challenging problem for us, right? So let me skip through this. So we made a data set of what we call natural language processing tasks, and then we provide the ground truth answers and we release them to the public so that other NLP researchers can conduct more research to try to understand the archaic Joseon Dynasty annals, right? So we call this Hanja Understanding Evaluation Benchmark Set, and it contains 4 tasks. One is chronological attribution, second is topic classification, third is named entity recognition, and fourth is summary retrieval. And chronological attribution basically means if you have some text written in the Hanja that was used in the Joseon Dynasty era, then you try to predict which king this was from, right? So which era, which time period during the Joseon Dynasty was this written? That's the first task. The second task is topic classification. So when you're given a sentence, the original sentence written in the Hanja characters there, what is the topic? So in this case, the major topic is politics. The minor topics are royal family, military affairs, financial administration, economy, etc. Okay. The third task is called named entity recognition. It means given a sentence, you identify which part of that sentence represents names of people, names of positions, names of regions, etc. Right? So for example here, governor of Gangwon province, that's a region within Korea. So Gangwon province is in red. That should be one phrase that you have to identify. And then Hayeon, that's the name of a person. And so you identify the people, the regions, etc. And then summary retrieval. This is done, this task is matching the one sentence summary with the longer text in your data set. And we did this not with the Joseon Annals of Joseon Dynasty, but with another set of records, the daily records of the royal court and important officials. 승정원 일기? I'm not sure. So these records are written in the same period as Joseon Dynasty, Annals of Joseon Dynasty, but written by other people, and there are more of these records, but they're not translated into Korean because simply we don't have the resources to translate all of them. So by conducting, and so when we identify and make these tasks and benchmark data sets, we can then train these neural network models to produce answers automatically, such that for something like summary retrieval, we can actually produce summaries of unseen documents. So for Joseon Dynasty, for Annals of Joseon Dynasty, you can actually produce new summaries of each of the records, which will be helpful for the historians to try to understand what these records are about. Okay, so right, so we show that we made these tasks, and our models, which are trained based on MBERT, which is the multilingual version of BERT, and Anchi BERT, which is the ancient Chinese BERT. And when we add our data sets and our annotated data sets based on the Annals of Joseon Dynasty, we get improved results. And these results are these are percentages, accuracy, in terms of accuracy. So they're in the high 70s and low 80s. So that means that the models are doing a pretty good job at solving these tasks for unknown text, unseen text. Right, so I want to highlight this, and then I'll be done. This is called zero-shot experimental results on the daily records of the royal court. So when we try to do chronological attribution and named entity recognition on the daily records, which are not annotated or translated at all, our model, we call this zero shot because it's not in the training data set. But because these records are similar in the language as the Annals of Joseon Dynasty, we can still do this task for these daily records. And the accuracies for the named entity recognition, at least, is pretty high so that it's usable. For chronological attribution, it's in the 35%. So, you know, that's not too great, but then it's much higher than random because there are 28 kings, right? So there's promise. I think there's a lot of potential there. So let me end this by saying what I said at the beginning. There is a lot of recent interest in looking at ancient textual records from, not just from Korea, but, you know, all other countries and languages around the world. And we view this as a very great opportunity for both technical challenge in terms of, you know, how can we do NLP better, but also in this opportunity to contribute to this important topic of you know, world heritage and documented heritage. Okay, so thank you.